we were in Japan, we went to an owl, what we thought was an owl cafe, because Jenna really wanted to see owls. And they do like cat cafes and like there's all these different weird cafes where you can play with animals.
Yeah.
while you drink your coffee. Because have you ever wanted to enjoy like a warm beverage, but also wish you could get animal dander in it?
It's every day of
Japan.
my life, man.
We walk up and then this sign is on the door, and I'll just read you the lines. 1, it is a 1-hour replacement system. Okay. Hey, so far I'm not following, but I appreciate the effort. 2, since the previous accounting, thank you in advance. Still not with you, but I still appreciate the effort. Here's my favorite. Number 4. I'm going to skip 3 because it was boring. Please touch to stronking gently along the coat when you touch the owl. Do not touch the feet. I didn't mispronounce that. They did say stronking instead of stroking.
Gently.
Yes. Please touch to stronking gently. It's a society of people who have like incorrect Asian characters tattooed all over their bodies. It's like, just give it to them.
True.
My ex-girlfriend had a tattoo behind her ear. It was a Chinese symbol. And I think I'm remembering this correctly, but it was a big deal. It was supposed to say worship, but they had a Chinese foreign exchange student come stay with them, and she was like, ooh, can you read my tattoo? And he was like, yeah. She's like, what does it say? And he said, lunch. She was like, no. It says worship. He's like, oh, yeah. No. I could see that.
Sure.
All that to say, please touch to stronking gently when you're petting the owl along the coat.
We're men, okay? That means a few things.
Men sometimes have strange motives for the things they do.
But we are still proud. For if a man loses pride in manhood, he is nothing.
I'm a man. I'm sensitive.
Confronted with their true selves, most men run away, screaming.
Isn't this a strange conversation for men who aren't crazy?
You make me want to be a better man.
Hey, buddy.
I feel like I could do it better than that. Hey, buddy.
Hey, buddy. What's going on, my guy?
Not a whole lot. Just going to do a podcast. You want to join me?
Nah. Yes. Sorry.
Oh, shoot. I was not anticipating
my
that.
bad. Yes.
Hey, everybody.
Sorry,
welcome to... This is the Better Men Film Club. It's a podcast with me. I'm Nick Flora, and my co-host, Dave Gregory, who just spoke earlier, and he just spoke again. He's going to speak frequently. That's how this works.
Max 4 more times. 3 now.
Whoa. So this is a short one. This is essentially a Vine. If you're only going to speak 4 times. But yeah, welcome in. Today is a big day for us because this is the day that we're recording this where our podcast released into the world. We recorded a bunch of these and kind of put them out there today. And very exciting. It's been very fun to watch this baby be birthed into the world by 2 men. It really reminds me of the seminal Arnold Schwarzenegger classic Jr.
I was really hoping you would go there. That's my impression of Arnold Schwarzenegger giving birth.
It's been a fun day. It's been I feel like doing this podcast has brought us closer, and we were already pretty damn close. Too close if you ask your wife. But we're already pretty damn close. And then just kidding, Kate's lovely. I don't know why
she's the best.
Throwing her under the bus is so funny to me because she's the opposite of all that stuff.
Yeah, she's not hearing this now, but I guarantee you she'll listen later, and we'll get a giggle out of her.
She's she's a damn sweetheart. Love her. Hey, Kate. And it's just one of those days where you just don't want to wake up.
It's just one of those days. Sorry.
Yeah, I went there with you. Get to release a thing into the world, and I feel like this bond is even tighter than it was now that it's out in the world. And getting messages from friends of mine who are like, holy crap, you and this Dave guy are the same. Like you're on my friend Arthur texted me literally before we started recording and was like, you guys are on the same frequency. This is fantastic. So, It's
man,
nice.
I'm so glad. I knew we were on the same frequency. I was a little concerned that was a bad thing.
Oh, it won't be for everybody.
Yeah. I wasn't that concerned with it because I still enjoy listening to this, but
yeah, for sure. I'm gonna let people kind of take your time, digest it. all the different. We put out 3 in one day, so I did. As soon as like I added up all the time of those podcasts, it runs around like 3 hours, a little bit more. And I texted everybody that I knew 3 hours later, and I was like, "So, what'd you think of the first 3 episodes?" And I still haven't heard
kids. What do you mean, kids? Yeah.
So yeah, this is exciting. For if you're listening to this for the first time, this is a podcast where we talk about movies and ourselves, like our journeys as people going through this world with the messaging that we receive from pop culture, specifically films, and we want to shine a light on the good and the bad, and just kind of dissect and explore what each movie that we love or maybe we don't like says about us as a culture and as people. And that's our hope here, is that we can look at the art that was created, that we take in so much of, and that we can also look at it and have an honest conversation with each other about what needs to change, what actually works really well, what actually could be brought out a little bit more, what needs to go away altogether, that kind of thing.
It's a big day for the podcast too, Nick. This is our I feel like this is our Rex Manning Day. You know what I mean?
It kind of is. More and more. What was the song?
I don't remember that. What are you talking about? What song? I'm just kidding.
The Rex Manning song.
I'm just gonna be the worst co-host today. I started earlier with the no but instead of the yes and. I'm just gonna hit you with those the whole app.
Say no more.
No, I am excited. There you go. No, I'm excited to finally talk. I think it was a wise move, but today we'll be talking about I Love You, Man.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good move because honestly, if we didn't hurry up and do that, we were just going to basically like cut this one episode up into like the intro of every podcast over the next 20 days. We just keep referencing it.
It honestly was I Love You, Man is such an important movie to me personally, but also in my journey of self-betterment and pursuing male friendships, which was a thing I've talked about in every episode now, was honestly scary to me for a long time, because to seek male friendships, you have to be vulnerable in front of other men, which we are not taught to do. So this is an important movie. And for me personally, and I know finding out that you loved it too was just that was a magical day.
Oh, absolutely.
And I remember referencing it to you in our messages back and forth, and you're like, well, I'm watching that tonight. Or then you told me the next day, oh, you watched it or whatever. And I was like, okay, yeah, this friendship's going to be okay. We're going to be good. Yeah. I love that kind of stuff. I love talking up this stuff enough where you're like, okay, well now I just have to go watch it again. Like after our Batman episode, I couldn't wait I'm like, I'm gonna have to go back to the theater and rewatch this because it just got me amped up.
You know what I love?
You man.
Dang it.
I knew it.
I paused too long. That was one beat too many.
Well, we are gonna dissect this movie. If you've never seen it, please go watch it. It's I think up until next week, maybe later this week. It was on Netflix. I saw that it's disappearing off Netflix, which
way, it's still there today. Yeah,
it's there today. But for those of you who don't know, first off, we're just gonna talk about this movie. We're gonna talk about kind of take apart the themes of it. We're gonna both go from the film side and the messaging thematic side, and just kind of bounce back and forth and have a conversation about like the things it makes us think of and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. I'm really bad at explaining things today.
No, you're nailing it. We were all following that. Don't talk about my friend like that, Nick.
Wow. You really took me to school. Yeah. And I appreciate that. Thank you.
That was very
Sydney Fife of you.
Yeah. No problem.
Yeah. I love you, bro, Cephas.
Love you, bro, Montana. This
is a movie. Okay, so let me set the scene for you, David Gregory. This movie came out in 2009. It was filmed in 2008. It is a movie that came out right around the same time, I think a month or two before The Hangover in 2009. Yeah. And The Hangover just blew everything out of the water. The Hangover was, I don't know if people really remember that movie. 2 sequels were greenlit for that movie, The Hangover, before it even released. So studios were anticipating this to be a huge kind of like comedy rock star moment, and Zach Galifianakis specifically to be like the breakout star, which is wild to, because usually, I don't know, like I feel like corporate heads of studios don't really understand what is going to be a hit and what's not going to be a hit. You hear all these stories.
Yeah, they're not always right.
Well, you hear these stories of them bringing in creators and they're like, okay, we want a viral hit. And they're like, yeah, we all do. Like you can't just go and create a viral hit. But and not to take anything away from The Hangover, because I do think that movie has a lot of merit and is important for comedy movies, first off, because movies just don't make a lot of money in the theater for whatever reason, or, happened over the last 15 years, really. They've struggled here and there. So it is important. But I feel like the male friendship that was shown in that is a little bit more, it's a little meaner. It's a little meaner spirited. It's a little bit more negging, a lot more negging. There's a lot more, everybody kind of can't handle or stand the other person. I feel like the only two people who are actually friends in it is Bradley Cooper's character and Justin Bartha's character, who disappears like the first 20 minutes in it.
Well, that's the thing. I don't want to and I don't want to be woke, bro. I love that movie. I like The Hangover. It's a hilarious movie.
Yeah, it's funny.
It is it was the first of its kind in a whole lot of ways, but it doesn't it models friendship the way like Porky's models male friendship.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, y'all, nothing that they did is okay, and the only reason that we're laughing is because this is a movie, because these would be felony charges in real life, like you know what I mean?
For sure.
Where it's like, this is fun, but yeah, polar opposite when you think about I Love You, Man, and then like one of the first films where you go like, oh, this is like a blueprint. This is like mockumentary style, you know what I mean? Like they're talking about these issues.
Yeah, and I feel like even now, I Love You, Man, its tone and just, I mean, if you really think about it, it makes sense that it was less of a big deal at the time, because I don't feel like people knew what to do with it. I remember going to see it and walking out of the theater and there being a bunch of people around and somebody making the point, well, nothing happened in that movie. And I was like, thinking about it, offended first off, because I was like,
I'm mad right now.
I loved front to back that movie, and I was like, oh, I know what they mean though, because if you're comparing it to like the big tentpole summer blockbuster comedies, that was the same year like Land of the Lost came out, which was a huge flop, with Will Ferrell and Danny McBride.
Mm-hmm.
It was this big, like it was a big comedy. Bruno came out, which Sacha Baron Cohen's reaction to,
Insanity,
or like the second movie after Borat. I mean, this was like studios really swinging for the fences, and I Love You, Man just like isn't bothered by any of that stuff. It feels like a movie that is just at its own pace. It's really lovely. It's an easy watch. I mean, it has like moments of tension in it, but the movie, honestly, not that nothing happened in it, but there is no villain in it.
100%. I mean, the conflict at the end of that. Yeah, the conflict at the end of that second act is literally like, I think maybe you shouldn't come.
Yeah,
like,
don't come to my wedding.
It's like,
yeah,
it's like, which is it's a big deal, obviously, but there's no car chase,
But the entire conflict in the movie that really like sets up the third act is we need to understand what boundaries are and communicate better. Mm-hmm. And that's it. and I find it so delightful because there's no, and they play with it a little bit too. I really like that they play with, we'll get into the movie a little bit later, but they play with the notion of like, oh, maybe I shouldn't trust this character because somebody has to be the bad guy here. Is Sidney Fife, Jason Segel's character, going to be a con artist? Like you just keep waiting. They play with that enough. And then I love that they're just like, no, they're just friends. They're just guys who are trying to figure out how to love each other.
Another movie that does that really well, and we can jump into it after this. I don't want to. We'll chase rabbit trails all day, but is About Time. I know that's one of your faves too,
it is.
And that's another one where I feel like you keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it doesn't. You just go like, oh no, hey, like sometime like this one can just kind of feel like real life, even though About Time is literally about time travel. You go like you keep waiting for that huge like the big end of the second act moment where it's like, and here's where everything goes to hell, and then it just kind of doesn't. And you're like, oh yeah, I guess we don't have to self-sabotage everything.
No. And there's enough going on internally.
Yeah.
That we don't need all that external drama and external, sometimes movies feel like they have to throw everything in the kitchen sink in there. And it's just like, didn't need it. Like I think as people, we're okay with just some internal struggle. And what would I do? Because watching About Time, especially, I was like, what would I do in this situation? I don't need all of the like everything's gone wrong, and it just takes away from like the sweetness and the point of the whole thing too. If they broke up Donald Gleason's character and Rachel McAdams' character, it's like, what are we doing? We just got them together. Let's not even worry about that, So, and with I Love You, Man, the same way, like there is a moment in the movie where Paul Rudd's character and Rashida Jones's character, they kind of have a moment where they're like, we need to take a step back here. But they don't break up, and it resolves itself relatively quickly with good communication. I was just like, this is incredible. I love that this is being shown on screen.
Well, I want to jump into all that second act stuff too. That's one of my favorite parts about that movie. But let's begin at the beginning.
Let's start at the beginning. So this movie it comes out in 2009. It's written and directed by Jon Favreau, who started off as a director, started off as a writer for movies like Meet the Parents. He wrote on Zoolander. He wrote, I guess he was an actor in that movie Duplex. We just talked about all these Ben Stiller movies. So if you thought that we weren't going to have an episode where we mentioned Ben Stiller, he came up naturally, guys. He's the Matt Damon for Jimmy Kimmel for us. He's just going to keep coming up. Jon Favreau also had a hand in writing Meet the Fockers, and then finally he directed a few things early on in his career, but the first kind of big studio movie he did was the rom-com in 2004, Along Came Polly, starring Jennifer Aniston and Ben Stiller, and my personal favorite Philip Seymour Hoffman role to date.
I'm so annoyed you just said that, because I literally had that armed and ready to drop. Of course you would, though.
Say it now.
Another thing that a lot of people forget about movie, Nick.
Tell me, Dave. I forgot everything about it.
I don't want it.
Okay,
I don't want it.
Yeah, I know. I really am placating you at this point. But Along Came Polly, a movie that I understand why audiences and actors do what they do. Like I get that Ben Stiller, after, especially like in 97, he did something about Mary. and then he just was like on this huge trajectory of like, let's put him in everything, especially after 2000 Meet the Parents. He just was doing like rom-com after rom-com after rom-com. Yeah. He was the guy, as you said earlier, who was in a movie and everything just went wrong and it just got more and more awkward and he's more and more misunderstood. And that was like a formula back then. And I think what also makes I Love You Man refreshing, and even like the Judd Apatow rom-coms of, from 40-Year-Old Virgin on, is that it doesn't have to keep getting worse and worse, and the actor or the main character doesn't have to keep stepping over his words over and over again for audiences to enjoy it. We kind of like cringed out. We got over cringe stuff pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's like not everything needs to be Tom and Jerry, which is what a lot of those movies felt like, where it was just like, all right, I need a break. Give him a shower and comb his hair and get the goop out of his face for a minute. Like, those drive me nuts.
But it's also interesting that he had such a hand in the Meet the Parents, Meet the Fockers, Along Came Polly, and then he does I Love You Man, which doesn't have that formula. It really is just like the beauty of I Love You Man is that these characters are just a little quirky, and we have a character who's pretty passive aggressive and doesn't really speak his mind and is trying to figure himself out while also, and then we have this other character that he befriends who has no boundaries and just says whatever he wants, and it's so refreshing, and the two of them together are learning from each other, and I think there's something really beautiful about that. No, we're just going to let these two characters who are diametrically opposed but have enough in common where you would believe they would be friends. Like, we're going to just watch them be friends, and then whatever happens.
Yeah, I also genuinely love, when you look back, these are two of my favorite actors, like Jason Segel and Paul Rudd. Massive fan of both of these guys. And this was an important film for both of them. Even though this wasn't like this huge marquee movie, I really still believe we haven't even begun to see like the second life it's going to have on streaming and stuff like that.
Agreed.
I've been posting a lot about it lately, even just getting ready for this podcast. And I have a lot of guys, especially that I know are into movies, that are into film, that haven't seen it, and they're like, wow, I just watched it, oh my gosh, like this was so great. But like leading up to this point, it's kind of interesting. Paul Rudd's career is really interesting because like Clueless was his first major acting role, and then he kind of didn't have a major acting role again until, he showed up in a lot of stuff. Yeah. He showed up in a lot of the Apatow-verse stuff, kind of like Jason Segel. Like, they were these like, oh, like, yeah, I kind of know who that guy is, or I recognize his face. But not until I think it might have even been the same year. If not, it was the year before. But I think Paul Rudd had Role Models in 2008 or 7, or it might have been 2009.
Yeah, you got it.
Jason Segel didn't really have anything leading up to this. Had he already done Forgetting Sarah Marshall?
Yeah, up to this point. That was 2008. This was like the next year. So this was the first movie that he did post Sarah Marshall where he was like in a leading role.
Gotcha. So
he didn't
Jason
do leading
Segel had
role
one
stuff.
leading, right? So he had that one leading role deal, and then there was this one. Paul Rudd, honestly, like Clueless for sure wasn't a leading role. Role Models was kind of his first, so they're both coming off of their first leading role into this movie, where I guess you could say it's Paul Rudd is probably first billed, but like it's very much both of them.
It's a co-bill for sure.
100%. But it's super interesting to see that, and then to see how like this movie, I mean, so now that being said, I know Jason Segel 2004 or 5 was How I Met Your Mother when that started. And so we kind of only knew him also. We only knew Paul Rudd as the super dry, sarcastic friend, like in Knocked Up and movies like that. Role Models, he plays that same role. Clueless, he kind of plays that role. Jason Segel, we kind of only knew him as Marshall on How I Met Your Mother, which I'm a massive fan of him on that show. It was so good. Casting in general on that show was so good, but then for both of them to come in here and Marshall, Jason Segel goes from Marshall to Sydney, which is a complete character switch, and then Paul Rudd goes from his kind of dry, sarcastic, sardonic character into kind of like a Marshall. You know what I mean? It was really interesting to see them switch, and both of them just like their role. I assume that is both of them in their day-to-day life, like they were playing exaggerated versions of themselves because they just nailed it.
Well, if you hear them talk about it, I watched a bunch of interviews on this press tour for I Love You Man leading up to this podcast, and they are, you know, they were asked about that because that's the normal question they get asked: how much do you like your character in this movie? And they were like, we're the same person. Like we are neither these characters, where we meet somewhere kind of in the middle, both of us. And they're like, and Judd Apatow talks about how when he made Knocked Up, he had to separate Paul Rudd and Jason Segel multiple times because they just buddied up immediately and became super close and still are. And this is the third or second out of 3 movies that they made together. And it just really makes me happy. You know, it always makes me happy to hear that from like a movie comedy nerd standpoint, where it's like, oh, they were friends on film and they're friends in real life.
What did he say at the beginning? You sent me that YouTube clip from the Rotten Tomatoes interview. What does Jason Segel open up with? I forget. He has some question that threw that interviewer off.
Oh my gosh. Well,
he's like, hey, you out here doing your best? Are you giving him hell or something like that?
Yeah. He says, hang on, let me think. It's not go get him, Tiger, but he says something like, are you, yeah, I don't know. I'll have to go look.
I literally have it up.
Oh yeah. Press play and then I'll pretend to know it.
Very well. Showing them your stuff out there?
There you go. Did you hear that? You showing them your stuff out there? You showing them your stuff out there? My favorite thing about that was, and the kid literally goes like, he just like stutters for 30 seconds. But my favorite thing about it was Paul Rudd goes, it's just like his thing. Like he used to do that all over the set to like all of the extras. He just walked up to him. He's showing him your stuff out there. And people are like,
go show him your stuff, you know? It's fantastic. Like Jason Segel just seems like this kind of guy who's like, I'm gonna throw it in there. If they don't use it, they don't use it. Who cares? And this movie has a lot of improv, and I'm a big fan of the whole model, the Adam McKay, Will Ferrell model, Judd Apatow, of like, let's just do a fun run. But it can be done to the point where it's annoying. And I also like structure and written jokes. So I feel like if you do it just enough, which this movie feels like it really nails that. Like, oh, I bet that was improv. Or there's moments where like you just see Paul Rudd crack up or about to, and you're like, oh, that's real. That's you just know that's real. I mean, he's a fantastic actor, but sometimes you're like, I don't know if he can act that. That felt like a Paul Rudd guy, moment.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, the whole movie was just kind of him being his like charming self.
Well, even in the moment, and we mentioned it on another earlier episode, but like the moment where they're Jones Beach having fish tacos, their first real like romance date, they just got a little bit tipsy and just let him go. And I think that's fantastic. And I'm like, what a beautiful way to like show a friendship, a burgeoning friendship.
Yeah.
I feel like any other movie, they would make Sydney a little bit of a douche, or make him a con man, and they would they would have moments in the first time that they went to dinner that kind of show it. But it gets a little devious. And this one is just 2 dudes meeting on a level where they're just stoked to have met each other, and like they're just genuinely enjoying each other's friendship. And there are written parts of that scene too, where he's asking about like, so how's the sex life, you know, in your
Yeah.
relationship and stuff? And he's like, whoa, you know, easy there. But anyway, going back to like with Paul Rudd, you're absolutely right. And a thing that I really respect about him, which there are many things, is that he doesn't take show business seriously, and he does whatever he wants. Because if you look at, like, he came out of the gate first, he did a couple TV things, and then his first role was in Clueless, which was a humongous movie. And then he does some theater, and then he comes and does like Romeo and Juliet in 96.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
With Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet, and then he does some more theater, and then he does these indie films. I love, even now, he'll do these like weird indie films with like Emile Hirsch, and he's just way out there. And then, you know, he pops up in like the most random places. He was in a movie called The Object of My Affection with Jennifer Aniston.
Yeah.
Right at the height of Friends. He popped up in The Cider House Rules, as I think Charlize Theron's betrothed at the beginning of that movie, a completely serious role in a very serious movie, which is very, and then the next year he's in Wet Hot American Summer, which is one of my favorite Paul Rudd roles.
And it's still funny to me that coming out of Clueless, like, he still hasn't done like a major bill. I think Wet Hot American Summer may be the most screen time he gets out of all of those movies you just listed, almost. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, by Romeo and Juliet, it's like 30 seconds of like, hey, we just needed a pretty dummy to stand here for a minute and be like, what? Romeo who?
Yeah, that movie, he definitely was in like a bunch of scenes with a bunch of people, you know. Right. There was never really a one-on-one.
Which
with
it's
him
Baz Luhrmann. Like, I think most actors are like, whatever, yes, just put me in the background.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
It's just interesting to see, because he has so much. There's such a gravity about him. Like, there's so much. He's a charming guy in Clueless. It really shocks me he didn't get more of a shot after that.
You're so right, and I think a lot of it just has to do with the fact that like Hollywood just didn't know what to do with because he does have this kind of sensitivity about him, you know. Like, he's a softer guy. He plays an asshole, but it's funny. It's not like, you know, his assholeness in Wet Hot American Summer is just over the top humorous.
Totally.
And you know, and he's a legitimately good serious actor as well, as we've seen in the past few years. But it just seems like he just does whatever he wants, and same thing with Jason Segel, and I really appreciate that, because we didn't really see him for a while, and then he pops up in Anchorman, where we really see as Brian Fantana, where we, you know, he's going head to head with Will Ferrell and Steve Carell and all these, and what the hell is his name? Champ. I can't think of his name.
Oh, yeah, neither can I, but I know who you're talking about.
Hold, please. And David Koechner. Yeah. And it's just incredible. He not only holds his own, like, he stands out. Like, we really see Paul Rudd at his silliest and most comedic. And that feels like the thing that just goes boom. Like, now Paul Rudd's a comedy guy, and he's in 40-Year-Old Virgin. He's in, you know, he pops up in all these, you know, Knocked Up and Walk Hard, Forgetting Sarah Marshall, role models. I Love You, Man, and Forward. And then I feel like it gets to remind us again later that, I do serious stuff too, because he starts doing all these indies again. And it really is phenomenal, his arc.
It's really interesting to me. I think maybe because he came along at the end of the 90s, but I could totally see him if he'd been a little bit older, or if he'd maybe gotten on the scene a little bit sooner, like, he could have filled that, like, super sensitive, soft-spoken Ethan Hawke character that was in all those early 90s movies. It feels like towards the end of the 90s, though, in terms of leading men in movies, that was not the way things were headed. It was all like Jackass was on the rise. It was like more of that, like, headed into the early aughts. You kind of got away from that sweet, quiet, sensitive leading male archetype that was more at the beginning of the 90s. Because it's interesting that, like, I look at his performance in Clueless, and maybe this is me projecting because I want him to be this guy when we become best friends.
Thank you.
But I look at Clueless, I look at I Love You, Man, and I go, like, that seems like the most Paul Rudd. Those seem like the most Paul Rudd roles. Outside of that, he plays a lot of really sarcastic, kind of cool or idiot roles a lot. But it shocked me to look at his IMDb and go like, oh, he actually doesn't play Peter Clavin, that character, very often or at all. He's kind of like even in Ant-Man, he's like the deadbeat dad, the kind of like the screw up, and you're just go like, that's so interesting that's what he keeps getting cast as, because I totally see him more as the, like, sweet nerd guy. But I don't think people realize how influential I Love You Man was on how we all see Paul Rudd, or just on half of the things. Like, do you know how many kids I know that say totes my goats that have no idea it came from this movie? You know,
most people don't. I've shown this movie to people and they're like, that's where that's from, or like Slap It to Bass Man, or like whatever. They're like, what? You know, but yeah, it's so true. Like, he really, I feel like he needed a little bit of dirt on him. Like, we needed, meaning like age and time, and like, I feel like to truly get for him to be, you know, the Ant-Man role where you could believe that he's a good meaning guy, but he just keeps getting into trouble. And he had to show, like, there's a 2006 indie film called Diggers, which is really interesting. And he plays kind of a similar-ish Scott Lang role in that. And then he did a few more. The one with Emile Hirsch that he did, it's called All Is Bright. It's a Christmas movie about like con artists, essentially, with him and Emile Hirsch. And he kind of shows that there too. Like, I was like, we had to see him in a couple different lights. And I hate that, like, we can't just let actors be actors. We have to let them, they have to go out and make movies for no money to show studios, hey, I can do this. Let me do something else. Because even with Jason Segel, like, I talked about it a little bit on an earlier episode, but I love his arc so much because that dude started, you know, his first movie, I actually watched the other night. One of my favorites, Can Hardly Wait. He has maybe 5 or less lines in that. And then, you know, he'd pop up in like Dead Man on Campus or SLC Punk.
Loved him in SLC Punk.
But he had a pretty major role in Judd Apatow's and Paul Feig's TV show Freaks and Geeks. And but the same thing with Paul Rudd. Like, I feel like Hollywood just didn't know what to do with him. Like, he was such a specific type that was going to be, now people feel like studios have Jason Segel types and things. They have Paul Rudd types and things. But he just, if you hear him talk about it, he just was kind of floundering around, and he was doing How I Met Your Mother, but it wasn't creatively satisfying. And as I talked about in, I think, the first or second episode with Judd Apatow, once Freaks and Geeks got canceled, he had the entire cast come over to his house and was like, listen, if you're going to work in this business and you're going to be successful, like, you can't just sit around and wait for people to give you jobs. Like, you're going to have to learn how to make your own stuff, learn how to produce, direct, and write. And I will teach you how to do that. And it's incredible. Everybody from Seth Rogen to John Francis Daly, who played the main kid, Sam Weir, on there, became a successful writer and actor. You know, Martin Starr, Jason Segel, Busy Phillips. That show is stacked. And he taught them all kind of like, come to, like, they have these like base camps, and it was just such a lovely gesture. And then when Jason Segel kind of hit a creative rut, he came to Judd Apatow and was like, I don't know what to do. I just feel like I'm not getting the roles that I want. And he's like, well, what do you want to do? And he's like, well, I want to be in a Muppet movie. And he was like, well, they're not making those right now. So why don't you just show us what you can do? And so he wrote the weirdest script that Judd said he's ever read, I think, if I remember correctly, which is Forgetting Sarah Marshall, which ends with a fucking puppet musical.
Yeah. A great puppet musical.
And so, long story short, like, he had to make that movie and write it with Judd, and it was an arduous process, but like, that movie is singular. That movie really stands out in the pantheon.
Really is.
I don't know. Are you a fan of Forgetting Sarah Marshall? I guess
absolutely.
Being a Segel fan. Yeah.
So a huge Segel fan. I think it's also, and I was a fan of his before that movie came out, and that helps. I have a theory that, like, it's funny because Kate and I are rewatching, or not rewatching, but we're watching How I Met Your Father right now, the spinoff for How I Met Your Mother. We are huge How I Met Your Mother fans. It is one of like 3 or 4 shows where if we just have like 20 minutes to sit down and eat, and we just want to watch something real quick, we'll watch one of those. But I have this theory where it's like, you can kind of tell if a show is going to be good in the first 3 or 4 episodes if you can see at least 60% of that cast in like major billing rom-com movie roles. And if you can't, if you're just like, nah, I don't really see that, it's probably not going to be a great show. Yeah. And I feel like that always happens. Parks and Rec, The Office, How I Met Your Mother, Scrubs, those movies started, and I was like, yeah, this guy or this girl, they could totally carry an entire film. And he had that as Marshall. But I'm super grateful to that show because none of those movies, not even Judd's star power, would have gotten Jason Segel in a top billed role in Forgetting Sarah Marshall without all of America saying, hey, we like Marshall, so we will go see your crazy rated R comedy, you know?
And honestly, like Forgetting Sarah Marshall had to have Kristen Bell, had to have Russell Brand, had to have Mila Kunis, had to have like Jonah Hill when he was starting to pop around that time. And
I think Bobby Lee pops up in there for a minute, doesn't he?
I think you're right. And Paul Rudd pops up like it, and Jason Segel in one of those interviews mentioned, he was like, you know, Paul Rudd is this really busy guy, and he was so nice enough to come out and just hang out with us on set and do this, really like pop up, you know, in this very small supporting role as the surfing instructor. One of my favorite throwaway lines in that is when he's like out of frame, Paul Rudd is floating out of frame, and he just goes, "Oh, the weather outside is weather." Like just says it, just doesn't know if they'll use it, just sings, "Oh, the weather outside is weather," while he's on a beach in Hawaii. But and Paul Rudd turns around to him in that moment in a very like male vulnerability Titan moment and says like, "Oh, dude, what a blast it was. I read that script and I was like, please have me be a part of it." And he was like, really?
Yeah.
And he was just like, yeah. He's like, dude, you wrote an incredible script. It's such a unique film. But that's the whole thing is Jason Segel had, along with Nick Stoller, the director, I think that's who directed that. And then also Judd Apatow had this clout to be like, hey, we're going to do this movie. Who wants to be attached? And everybody was like, oh, I love Jason Segel. Let's go do this. And so sometimes it takes the support of other people who are marquee names to come out and do a thing to show. Also now pay attention to this guy, which is what Judd does. And that's, I feel like once the creators or leaders lead with that, other people start picking up that mantle as well. And it was really beautiful.
I also think a lot of the movies that he was involved in, like they're going to hold up. I personally, again, I really like The Hangover, and I appreciate it for what it was. I'm not going to preface all this stuff, but I'll just say, like, I think that movie it has solidified its place in the zeitgeist, just because it was not maybe the first of its kind of those movies, but it was definitely one of the biggest. Like that movie was huge.
Humongous.
The loudest for a rated R comedy to come out and do that well was crazy. So it spawned all of these other ones. The thing is, like, Forgetting Sarah Marshall is a hard R comedy, but that one will hold up more than The Hangover will. My deal right now is like I go when Kate and I rewatch movies during COVID at the beginning, at the height of the pandemic, we watched like National Lampoon's Van Wilder. And I was like, oh my God, I just remember how good this movie was. Well, you rewatch it and you go, what you were remembering was this was your first experience with Ryan Reynolds, and this guy is going to be one of the biggest stars on the planet. Yeah. But the movie wasn't that great. The movie does not hold up. The movie is hard to laugh at in parts because it makes you really uncomfortable in a way that not just like The Hangover made all of us uncomfortable when it came out, but after 2020 was a long year. 2020 was a long year where a lot of things changed. We grew in a lot of areas, and we look back at certain things and go, oh, yeah, that makes me uncomfortable now. Yeah. But there are still movies like Forgetting Sarah Marshall, like Tropic Thunder, some of these movies where you go like, hey, that one makes me uncomfortable, but it was still done really well. This is still a great movie, and it will hold up, even though it did some things that wouldn't get done nowadays. It got them done in a really, like, I can rewatch Forgetting Sarah Marshall with Kate, and we're both laughing the entire time. Yeah. We rewatch The Hangover, and if I'm honest, like, we're laughing a lot of the time, but a lot of the time it's like, oh man, I forgot about that part. Like, you know, I didn't know. I forgot you could say that.
And that feels like, and that's Todd Phillips in general. Like, I really appreciate Todd Phillips. A majority of what he does. Old School was one of my favorite comedies when I was that age that came out, and I still think holds up, but
it walks the line really well.
He definitely like leans on the shock comedy a little bit too hard in The Hangover, and that in shock comedy doesn't age well. But also, like, I'm here to say, if anything in this episode, like, especially when we talk about, you know, sitcoms, rom-coms, anything, comedy is not supposed to be evergreen. Comedy is supposed to comment on what's going on in the moment. And if it holds up, like the comedy of it holds up over the longest amount of time, you know, I'm not going to discredit that comedy, but like that's very rare if that happens.
Yeah.
And so watching The Hangover or any kind of art, like I'm completely fine with watching something with 20, that came out 20 years ago with 2022 eyes and being like, that's not okay. Because it just shows how much we've grown as a culture
100%.
and a society. And also, but I don't need to, that's the whole thing. And I don't want to get into cancel culture and everything because we probably will at some point, but like it just doesn't, I don't know. It bothers me when people try to cancel things from 20 years ago. We could also just be like, yeah, at the time we watched that and we all thought that was okay. We don't anymore. That's fine. Like let it be a timestamp of the time without, you can't go back and rewrite history. But you can learn stuff from that and move forward with that lesson is I guess what I'm trying to say.
Add the lessons we've learned to the narrative moving forward and we're good to go. Yeah. But you don't need to like rewrite the whole thing 100%. And I hope it didn't come across that way with The Hangover. I love that movie, but I do think it's really special to look at the projects Jason Segel has done and go like, hey, this is something, and Paul Rudd as well. I guess a lot of it is Judd Apatow, but to go like, hey, this person is doing something that is not even, not only is it not necessary, but until they started doing it, I wasn't sure it was possible to make films that are this evergreen, that hold up this well, and that do it sometimes with a hard R on these comedies. It's like it is really, really impressive to navigate some of these topics and do it that well. But anyway.
Yeah, and there's a lot of moments in I Love You Man that are cringy or, they're dick jokes or masturbation jokes or, the kind of Apatowian humor that's thrown in there because it gets giggles out of dudes. And girls too, but like, I feel like that's the whole, like, he said balls, kind of like, the low hanging fruit, if you will, of the comedy tree. And I giggle at that stuff too, but that's not my favorite stuff. That's not the stuff that you remember from these movies. And it's interesting talking about Van Wilder because a movie that also is kind of in that pantheon with Ryan Reynolds of the like, man, that really didn't hold up. Do you remember the movie Waiting?
Oh yeah.
And Justin Long's in it. Like that's one of those movies too, where
Ryan Reynolds wishes I didn't remember Waiting.
Yeah, I bet you're right. But that's the whole thing. Like we need to let people have the arcs they're going to have. You can't not make something because it might be problematic later, and you just don't know. I mean, historically, men have been making the majority of things in culture, especially Hollywood, and they were making things without running it past women or other minorities to ask if this is offensive or it's okay. They're just like, it's fine. It's sort of the like ask for forgiveness instead of permission model. And they definitely could have done more of that. But overall, like I Love You Man is a movie that I feel like you can watch with all different types of people and it has something for everybody, but it's also like, it's in the ways that I wouldn't say problematic, but just is sophomoric. It is sophomoric for a reason. And that's one thing I wrote down before this podcast.
That's really good.
I really like, and we can get into it now. And then I want to talk about our post I Love You Man, if you want to think about it. Post I Love You Man, favorite Segel and Rudd roles.
Okay.
And we'll end on that. But like to get into I Love You Man now, like one of the things I wrote down is that this movie does such a fantastic job about showing every type of male friendship.
Yes.
And even female friendship. I was like, oh man, everybody is kind of, there's the friend of Rashida Jones's character, Zoe. She has these two friends she owns a business with. And one of them is a perpetually selfish single girl and who's a total like proxy for a Kristen Wiig character. It's like they couldn't get Kristen Wiig. So they made this actress do it. She's fantastic.
100%. The Haley character.
Yeah. The Haley character. And then Jamie Presley's character is this like, kind of mean but super hot like wife to Jon Favreau's character, and they kind of hate each other, and you're like maybe they shouldn't be together, but then you're also like they're kind of perfect for each other. Like they showcase that really well. And also just to back up for a second, the plot is basically a guy who gets engaged at the beginning of the movie, realizes while making the wedding party that he doesn't have any close male friends, and she has his fiance has a lot of female friends, and the wedding party is going to be a little uneven. And so he sets out with the help of his dad and mom and brother, played by Andy Samberg, fantastically.
Great.
Okay, how do you make friends as an adult? How do you make male friends as an adult? And as he says in the movie, Paul Rudd's character of Peter, like, it's such a weird concept, and that's the hook, and that's what got me, because I couldn't have been more on board with it.
Well, what's crazy is literally 2009 this movie comes out, and it says, hey, it's kind of weird for guys to make friends, huh? And everyone's like, you know what? I think it is. Like, we go like, hey, thousands of years of being alive, and we really haven't had that conversation. There's a lot of movies that have talked about different types, different archetypes of male friendships and things like that. But one that just came out and went like, hey, this is happening right now. There are a lot of guys in their mid-30s that have everything except for relationships with other men.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know how to, you know what I mean? Like,
from a comedy standpoint, we'd seen like the Judd Apatow stuff for a few years. So everything from Knocked Up to 40-Year-Old Virgin to Superbad was all like the man-child syndrome. And this is a case where our main two characters are not man-child archetypes, really. They're both successful men in their business. They're both like, they both have the relationship that they want. They don't like Paul Rudd's character is a girlfriend guy. He's a serial monogamist, and he is a really good boyfriend. It's mentioned multiple times. And I also love how supportive his fiance Zoe, played by Rashida Jones, is. She's constantly standing up for him. She's constantly like, even with her friends who are kind of not shit talking him, but just kind of like, hey, have you asked these questions? Because they haven't been dating very long. She's like, no, he's not like that. He's a great guy. And when like, there's moments where he shows up and helps or brings out, you know, the root beer floats or whatever, which we'll talk about in a minute for Pepperidge Farm. You see her beam. And even at like dinner table scenes, she looks at him with this like, God, I love it so much. It honestly is goals. It's fantastic.
It really is.
And dude, I'm not even kidding. Like, it makes me think of you and your wife, Kate. Like I'm not kidding. Like, I've seen her look at you when you're just talking about your stuff, and she's genuinely, I was with you guys this last weekend. It makes me so happy to watch her.
She's like, yes, he is a hopeless little nerd, but he's my hopeless little nerd. No, I mean, I'm not even being self-deprecating. Like, that is genuinely it. And that's part of why I'm glad you said that, because you hate to be that guy that goes like, I can totally see myself in this main character, man. Yeah. But I think a lot of men were saying that when this came out, where it was like, this movie, and this is another thing it does really well, is that like it makes the point that, hey, not everybody is the sports playing, poker night, beer chugging guy. And there's nothing wrong with those guys. And those guys aren't the type of guys we need to fix. But there are some guys that either can't operate within that or can to an extent, but it's not their wheelhouse. And they have an even harder time finding friends, because that is, where do guys go to make friends? It's like Buffalo Wild Wings and Hooters and sports events. And you go like, what about like that guy who kind of played some bass in college and has really been focusing on his relationship and his career? Like, what do they do now? Let's not talk about like how they got here and how to avoid getting there, because it's not even a problem to avoid. It's just like hey, now that you're here, what's the weird, awkward, process of going through finding male friendships? And I 100% found myself in that, where I was probably a little bit more kind of one foot in each camp. I had male friends growing up, but they were very seasonal. Mm-hmm. And so for me, just to see a movie where it went like, I mean, the thesis of the movie, I don't think this is jumping ahead, but is essentially saying like, hey, you just kind of have to do it. Like, I think Andy Samberg's character says it at some point, right? You even quoted that to me when you sent me that Marco Polo like a year ago, being like, hey, dude, would you like to be more intentional friends? What does Andy Samberg say when he's talking to him? You'll probably remember the line.
He's like, you have to be aggressive about it. Like, get out there and like, if you see, like, set up a mandate. If you see a cool looking dude, strike up a conversation and ask him on a mandate, which is in his mind is after work drinks or lunches, like no dinner or movies. And I disagree with that. I love going to the movies, dude. You and I could go to movies and then go to like a 4-hour dinner and talk about the movie. So
100%. My wife would love that. She'd be like, please rescue me from this 3-hour movie.
I'm going to stand up for Kate and say, I think all of the reasons that you're like, oh, she puts up with me. She loves you for it. And that's what, is why
she put ups with me.
She put ups with you. And not mean. She put ups.
Yeah. Not mean. I do not mean.
But she is like, this is the Kate podcast now, but like, but I've really, I really love you guys, and like getting to spend interpersonal time with you, actually going out, places with you guys. Like I stayed with you guys over the weekend, last weekend, and like getting to do that was really special, because I really get to see different dimensions of you and your relationship. And
I just had an epiphany.
Really cool. Yeah.
I hate interrupting you, even though I'm really good at it. I want to pitch something to Judd, who, by the way, I don't know if you knew this, Nick, is actually our 5th subscriber.
Oh my gosh.
It was Bobby Lee, and then I can't remember who was next. and then Judd
Arbats.
Apatow. Oh yeah, Arbats and Judd or not. Sorry, then John Lovitz. Anyway, we've got a celebrity.
Bourbonum's in there somewhere.
Oh, Bourbonum. I don't know if Bourbonum subscribes. I know that he keeps up with
listener.
it though. Yeah.
He's super cash with his listenership.
Yeah, he's pretty
busy.
cash.
He's busy.
Anyway, I've got a pitch for Judd Apatow, a spiritual sequel to I Love You Man, kind of like he made a spiritual sequel to Knocked Up with This Is 40. Is I Love You Guys, and it's about a friendship throuple because hey, I'm just saying that's a new thing now. A lot of people are staying single or becoming single later on in life, and about a couple meeting a friend who's going like, hey, I want to be friends with both of y'all, and the couple's trying to figure out how do we get to know this friend, and the friend is figuring out how do I like a couple like becoming friends, and it's called I Love You Guys, and I could be in it if you want, Judd.
Oh wait, we're still talking to Judd.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
He stopped listening after you did your impression of him the other day. Sorry, buddy.
Oh, good call.
I don't want to like throw reality into this plan. It's already been made, and it was called You, Me, and Dupree.
No. You, Me, and Dupree was the bad. Like that's the same because like Dupree is a mess in that one.
Yeah, that's
if
true.
like the I Love You Man version of You, Me, and Dupree, Jason Segel would have been like there's a million of that movie, like the friend that comes and crashes. No. This is one where everyone has their stuff together. The end of the second act that never really like turns into a dumpster fire.
Okay,
You know what I mean?
It's yeah, I understand. It's
also, if you have notes to give me the notes after I'm like when Judd's not listening, man.
Sorry,
you know what I mean?
Judd,
like, do you want to be in a Judd Apatow movie or not, Nick?
I'd like to strike this from the record.
Well, it's too late.
Oh,
it's not like we have control over what makes it into the podcast.
You're right. We are live streaming this right now.
Anyway, that's my rabbit trail. I Love You Guys.
It's a fantastic idea.
Us.
But that's also like speaking to the Andy Samberg character, like in any other movie, he would be leading the Paul Rudd character astray over and over again. And then finally the Paul Rudd character would have to stand up to him and listen to himself or do it his own way. But Andy Samberg is his brother. And I love that dynamic. And I want to talk about it because
yes.
they are brothers. They're 8 years apart. Andy Samberg, it's announced at dinner one night that he's best friends with his dad, and Paul Rudd is best friends with his mom,
and Hank Mardukas.
And Hank Mardukas. Also, J.K. Simmons, like what the crap?
Out of nowhere.
And Jane Curtin, like a fantastic pairing as his parents. But I love the Andy Samberg and Paul Rudd pairing as brothers because there's also a moment where they genuinely love each other. They just don't know each other very well. It would be like you and your oldest sister as adults being like, okay, now how do we navigate this? So not only that but even we see by the end of the movie, he asks Andy Samberg to be his best man in lieu of Jason Segel not being there. So we think, and it's just a beautiful moment where like, he's been wanting a friendship with him his whole life. He's probably idolized the Paul Rudd character. And even in the moment where he's like setting himself up, like he talks to Joe Latruglio's character, which is one of my favorite. So many funny people in this freaking movie, dude. But
everything you got. You're going to have to edit that out because I guarantee you that hurt everyone's ears.
You backed up enough. It's really good. But Joe Latruglio is a guy that works in his gym with Andy Samberg as a trainer. And he like sets him up and he has this squeaky voice. But even him saying like, I don't know, man, he's a cool guy. And he's like, oh yeah, what's he like? And then he's like, I don't know. I actually don't really know him very well, but like, give him a chance. Like, I really liked that moment. Like, cause he's like, you know what? I know he's a good guy. I just don't know him super well, but he needs friends. And he knows that Joe Latruglio is kind of a quirky dude, but he doesn't know his brother. So he's just trying everything he can.
Yeah.
Also fun little note. Joe Latruglio did that character originally, and it made it on film with all Elmo voice, just high pitched voice the whole time, and then they had to go back and ADR it, which is audio digital record in the studio afterwards, and just because it was just too much, it was too fantastical and
that
silly.
makes sense because Paul Rudd even says like when you set me up with Elmo over here at one point, and so like that makes total sense.
And so he went back in and just did like where his like voice would crack,
which was so much better. I love that.
So much better. Here we go, Galaxy. Here we go. It's fantastic. Joe Latruglio is one of my favorite comedic actors who pops up from time to time. A lot of people know him from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, but he was in The State, Wet Hot American Summer. Like he's just such a funny dude.
to your point too about the friendship between the brothers in this, and this is just like this happens over and over and over again in this movie, is basically like they just do such a good job of showing you real versions of all of these character archetypes. So I like just in general, when you look back on this and just in terms of like, this is such a loaded word, but just in terms of like representation, you go like, hey, look, the typical poker bro, he's here and he's kind of an a-hole because we all kind of know that guy and he knows he's kind of an a-hole. He's proud of it, but there's nothing wrong with him. That's who he is. And him and his wife, you go like, should they be together? And then you see moments where you're like, oh yeah, y'all have your things, but this is like, you're actually pretty good together. You know,
they both actually might kind of be into how much they hate each other. Like that might
100%,
part of
100%. And there's other things like, I mean, like codependency shows itself is way harder to identify in a relationship. Like that couple like is loud and they fight, but they love each other and they're good. Like they choose each other, you know? But like Andy Samberg, like you didn't see a lot of not hyper flamboyant gay characters portrayed on TV like that. And he just shows up. He's like, yeah, dude, I'm totally gay. Anyway,
he plays
then
himself.
he's just Andy Samberg. Yeah, literally.
He plays a cooler version of Andy Samberg.
Literally. Same with J.K. Simmons. Like you have a lot of the neglectful father role that like J.K. Simmons would be the perfect archetype for that. But he's not like that here. He just goes like, hey, dude, honestly, we love you, but you've kind of always been into your girlfriends, Paul. And we've been okay with that.
See how J.K. Simmons as a younger dad was probably a little bit rougher with them, probably a little bit, you know, you could see how he's probably grown a lot. Even the way he describes, you know, becoming an honorary gay is what Andy Samberg calls him. Like he took, and Paul Rudd's character is like surprised by that. You sense that like he was probably a little bit too harsh growing up.
But see, to me, I almost took it
over loving, and so Paul Rudd's character just went to the mom.
See, I almost took it though as like, because J.K. Simmons says like, yeah, your brother's my best friend, and I talk to Hank Mardukas every week, three times a week for 30 years. I go like, that actually sounds like a pretty well emotionally balanced dad.
That's true.
Paul, I think, is the guy who kind of like you and I growing up felt uncomfortable around certain types of masculinity, and so we just withdrew and had a lot of female friends or hung out with our sisters or our friends' moms. And you go like,
or your friends' sisters,
right? And so it was interesting to see what this movie did that I thought was smart, and it's a really subtle detail. But they go, hey, this guy has no friends and it's his fault. And it's okay. He is just kind of withdrawn and put his energy into his career or his relationships, but it's not his evil dad. It's not his crappy brother. It's not masculinity that's the problem. Those guys are all friends with each other. It's just his fault, you know?
I love you so much. Read what that said. You can't read my handwriting. On this, I wrote down, Peter is the cause of his own problems. Like,
look at that.
Look at him. He's having a super time. That is so true. I love it. I love that we have a protagonist who he didn't do anything wrong.
Right.
Like he's not a bad person or even like a good person who's gone astray, who makes the wrong choices. He makes the choices he makes. And this is such a beautiful distinction. He makes the choices he makes by being a very present and albeit probably a little bit codependent boyfriend. He's such a good boyfriend, a very present and giving boyfriend. But he, by doing that, forsakes every other relationship in his life based out of who knows what, maybe fear. It's never really explored. But I love that they leave it open so we can have this type of discussion, because I absolutely was that guy too. I was like, well, no, it's the whole thing of like, when you have kids, if you make excuses to get out of social engagements because you could always say, I have kid stuff, nobody's going to fault you for saying, stop being such a good present dad or mom, come out with us tonight. But you can dig yourself into a rut where you forsake every other relationship and become lonely and depressed. And you're like, I don't have any friends. Yeah, because they kept inviting you out, but you kept saying no, but you had a good reason to. So even maybe internally, you didn't even know you were doing that. Like that is a common problem that parents find themselves in all the time, or people do it with their jobs. Like things that are labeled in our society as like, oh, we love that he's doing that thing. He's like really going for it. He's volunteering so much, or he works so much. Like he's really like dedicated to his craft, but at what cost, you know? And nobody's really going to fault you at that. But at the same time, especially with parents, and I think this is why we find ourselves a generation who's 30, 35, 40, and we don't have any true adult friendships, because we have thrown ourselves into our kids' lives, or we're the helicopter parent generation, or our jobs where we're obsessed with our careers, and we just kind of, or our marriages, and we just kind of like the friendships that are so valuable and bring us so much joy and help us in so many innumerable ways, like we let fall by the wayside. And that's where I love, that's where this picks up. Is like, we don't actually know his life. They don't show us flashbacks and anything. They don't need to. We get it. We get it from the jump.
And to an extent, it almost feels like, I mean, obviously it's presented like a problem, but like the reality of it is you go like, hey, nothing here is really wrong. There's not even really a problem. This is just kind of where we are.
Yeah.
You just don't have any close guy friends, and you're a great guy, and you're an awesome son and a pretty decent brother and a great boyfriend / fiance.
Yeah.
But this is where you have found yourself now. And it's going to be kind of funny digging yourself out of this thing. And it's like, just even that for someone to go like, oh, hey, it's not even necessary. I guess it's like, not that it's not your fault, but you go like, there's nothing wrong with the fact that I don't have friends, but I don't, and I got to figure it out now, you know?
Yeah. Oh shit. I dug my own hole and now I got to figure it out. And you see it because his friends at the beginning are Gilliam and like Aziz and Nick Kroll's character.
Great bout, man. Great bout.
great bout. Sorry, I lost my shit out there, man. But you see that he sees these guys all the time outside of work at the fencing club, which is hilarious that that's even in this movie. I love that made it all the way to the movie. Like that feels like a thing you would write in the script and people would be like, no, let's make it something else. Fencing club. But you see, and then the three characters that he hangs out with at fencing club are like, we're going to go to a bachelorette party at Joshua Tree for Aziz's character. And he's like, oh, okay. And he was like, sorry, man, I would have invited you, but you just never really seemed to go out with us when we go out. There you go. Boom. Like he's had ample opportunity to have real male friendships. Although, once you see the little sort of locker room bullshit that those guys have, it probably wouldn't have been a good fit for him, but he definitely like has opportunity. He just doesn't pounce on them. And I think we all have that. We all have opportunity. I mean, you and I are perfect examples of it. If it wasn't for like somebody doing to me what I ultimately did to you, which is saying like, hey, you want to make it weird for a second? I really think you're cool and I really want you to like me. I think we'd be good in friendship. Do you want to try this intentional friendship thing and get to know each other? And here's the thing. It might not work out. We might get a month into this thing and be like, we don't really have anything to say. But the risk there, the payoff is like brotherhood. You know what I mean? And I've had it go both ways. I've reached out to people and in the same way that I reached out to you, and it just kind of petered out and it made me sad, but then I at least knew, and I never regret taking the shot, but that is an extremely vulnerable thing. Like that's why Andy Samberg being like, dude, you just got to be aggressive about it. And you see time and time again, they show us, the jump cut of him trying to make all these friends and meeting up with the guy who is way older than his picture. And then Thomas Lennon's character who thinks he's on a date, it's just, that would make just one of those would make any other kind of generalized normal quote unquote man quit, be like, well, I tried. It's just
100%.
It's just useless.
Well, they also do a really good job of showing the fact that like you get effort on both ends. And I think I do this a lot where I'm making a point and then I cut myself off. But earlier, the point I was making too of like how they show like real versions of all of these archetypes is that I love that like Peter is not, even when it does get into their friendship, like between Peter and Sydney, like neither of them are perfect. Peter is painfully awkward and Sydney is not like the wise Yoda friend who has manhood figured out. Like he's kind of a mess, kind of like his life is together. He's making good money. His problem is his friends all grew up and got married and he decided he didn't want a serious relationship like that. He didn't want those things. Yeah.
Which is fine, but it seems like he's kind of scared of it in a way.
Maybe, but like at the same time, like he's a fairly well-adjusted guy. He has his moments though, like the engagement party where he makes his really awkward speech that he feels terrible about for the rest of the movie, or like he doesn't pick up after his dog on the Venice boardwalk. Like he has these little traits where you go like, there are flaws in this guy. He's not a perfect guy, not enough to call him problematic, but enough to be like, yeah, he's a mess, as much of a mess as any guy is, and so is Peter. But you see that on both of their ends where you go like, Sydney with the whole like the billboards thing and the way he goes about trying to help with the toast he makes at the engagement party. Peter with not wanting to really have tough conversations with his fiance or just having a hard time being himself. He's being too performative in front of Sydney. You see them both go like, hey, we're both kind of bad at this in certain ways. But right after that first night they hang out, the fish tacos, and that great scene where wait, are you talking about hybrid cars?
I thought you were talking about hybrid animals.
I'm totally on board with cars.
Yeah.
But he says like, oh, wait, I never asked you, man. Did you want to talk about real estate? Were you looking for a house? He's like, no, man, you just seem like a cool guy. I figured we should get a beer. And you see both of them go that kind of awkward, like, yeah, we both kind of need this and we're both kind of trying, and that you see that really sincerely awkward effort on both of their parts. And that sincerely awkward effort for the Jon Favreau character may look different, but it's just as necessary for him to pull his group of dudes together.
Yes.
And like maintain that. And I just love that you go like, yeah, they're both kind of bad at this but really good for each other. And it's like, man, it's so to the T where you just go like you said numerous times, you keep waiting like, oh, Sydney's gonna be a con man. No, because this movie is so real. This movie is so like, even the parts where you would go, well, that wouldn't happen. No one's going to projectile vomit in someone's face.
It's a movie. It's a heightened version of it, but
kind of. But also, man, I'll be honest. You've told me about some initial Tinder dates you've had where I was like, they what?
I know. I know.
Crazy stuff happens when you're meeting people or when you're going on dates and stuff. And so
when
I go
you put yourself out there, you have to be ready for some wild shit going down.
Literally, yeah, it's really hard to say that any one of those scenarios that they find themselves in couldn't actually happen.
Well, what's the quote? Like, it's dangerous business walking out your front door. Like, that is the thing. When you put yourself out there, you have to be ready for kind of anything. And I think it's also like, watching the movie with the captions on, I noticed a lot because there's that poker scene with Jon Favreau's character when they're all around the table and you notice certain things. But what I noticed was when watching with the captions on is that when he's being a dick to Paul Rudd, the other guys are like, he's fine, dude. He's just messing with you. Like they're under, like to his breath, under his breath. He's like, he's not really mad. Like, and I was like, oh, I see what this is. But also like, that's not my favorite room to be in. That's the room that like made me scared to be in a room full of dudes because it's all so aggressive and everybody's a little bit drunk and it's in the whole thing where you have to feel like you have to be the lawyer or like the advocate for your drunk friend because he's being such a dickbag and you have to be like, hey, he's not normally a dude. He's just drunk. Like you're reassuring new people. Like you're trying to like play like conflict avoidance, like, guy in the room. I was like, I hate that stuff. I hate this. It really like makes me put my hackles up.
I cringed and laughed so hard. I forgot about that scene. But when they go to the Chinese restaurant for the engagement party and he's just trying to leave. He's like, what, you said it's going to be stop by? She's like, I never said fly by. It's an engagement dinner, But then like right after the initial, they're like, well, hey, thanks for being here. And he goes, well, I promised Denise we'd be gone by the time appetizers were over. And she's like, shut up. You're like, dude, this guy does not care. He is that guy. And I have those friends. I know those guys where I'm like, no, that's who he is. And I love him. You really got to get to know him.
I know.
To know kind of like the soft, the ooey gooey center.
That guy probably needs real male friendship. Like
absolutely
more than anybody in the movie. And I love that like Paul Rudd's character just keeps having to be in the room with him and he never shies away. He always kind of approaches him and is like, hey man, so you play music? And he's just like, no, it just shuts him down, but he still keeps coming at him. And I really do appreciate that. And it might just be writing and it's a funny dynamic to have them two together. And so, but one thing I wanted to say about the Jon Favreau character that I read today that I fucking love. Do you want to hear something amazing that I learned today?
Yes.
Jon Favreau committed to this movie. He's an actor in it. He committed to this movie before Iron Man came out. Iron Man came out like the week that this movie was filming. And he was like overwhelmed with the Marvelness of it all and the like the press. He's the director of Iron Man. And he's like, wanted to back out. And he was like, I have to back out of this movie because I can't film for 2 weeks, and he was about to call the director and be like, this is just too much for me. Like I overcommitted. I have to take a break. And Robert Downey Jr. called him and said, he read the script and was like, you have to do this movie. And he was like, why? And he was like, you need to like he said the chop wood, carry water. He was like, you need something that's going to be a good distraction. That's going to make you just made this thing and it's bigger than you and it's taken off because nobody expected Iron Man to be what it, like you said earlier in an earlier episode, nobody asked for that. And Jon Favreau now talks about how whenever he's in the middle of promoting a huge Marvel type movie, he will go and make a smaller movie to offset that because it helps him kind of
that makes so much
things.
sense.
Like, so he did the movie Chef.
I was about to say that's how we got Chef, isn't it?
But it was Robert Downey Jr. that was like, dude, this is something special. Stay a part of it. Trust me, you'll be happy you did it, because you know how it is when you have something going on and it feels way bigger. You'll just stay at home and like wring your hands, just pace back and forth. You just need to do something. And a lot of times you need to do an activity so you can process things in the back of your mind. And I think too often we kind of let our anxiety run away with it. When sometimes it is smart you hear about authors and when they put out books, or actors when they put out movies, like the weekend of movie releases, they go on vacation and they turn off their phone.
Yeah.
Because they're just like, I just need to do something so this can process in the background. And I just love that. RDJ, man, he was just like
freaking RDJ, man.
This is special.
Look at that.
He's a I Love You Man fan.
He is a superhero.
He really is, you guys. But jumping,
they don't all wear capes. Iron Man literally didn't wear a cape.
He literally didn't. This time it's true. But talking about the whole like male archetype, like something that I wrote down that I really feel is special about this movie is that they show, like I said earlier, every male archetype, but they also show that like, and there isn't good and bad. It's that it's for you or it's not for you. You know what I mean? Like the Aziz and Nick Kroll character and Gilliam, they all probably get along. Gilliam.
Yeah. Gilliam.
They probably get along just fine. And then the same thing with like Jon Favreau and his buddies, they all seem to understand each other. They probably went to college together.
Yeah, absolutely.
There is that group. And even as he's driving around in that sort of establishing shot of like him in his brain, like looking at all the dudes hanging out together, they're not villainized ever. They're just like, no, these people found their people. And you just see him be like, I really need to find my people, you know? And
even his dad is literally like, yeah, your brother and Hank Mardukas and not you. And he's just like, okay, well, I mean, I just have to go find my guy.
Yeah. And I love that he does that. And at the moment that you're like Sidney, Jason Segel's character is like, maybe he's a con artist. What's going on with him? He doesn't seem to have any male friends. We meet his friends, and they go on that hike, and they talk about all these times that they've had with him, and they're all really good dudes. They all kind of remind me of Peter, honestly. And you see that like he's had really strong male friendships that lasted a long time. They just grew apart because they have kids or they're teachers and they have jobs that demand a lot of them. And you could see Jason Segel kind of being like, oh man, like, you're watching the Wonder Emporium again, like Mr. Megorium's Wonder Emporium again. And he feels a little bit left behind. And I think that's his whole thing, is that whether he's choosing this life of being the Bachelor, or he's purposely and intentionally, or he's choosing it because he's scared or running for something, it's never quite stated. And honestly, it's not important, but I feel like there's a lot to unpack. There was like, this is also a way to do it,
Totally. It's just so nice. It's like, hey, there's nothing wrong with Sidney. He just doesn't want to be in a relationship. There's nothing wrong with Peter. He's just focused too much on his. There's nothing wrong with Sidney's friends. They just have moved on and have kids and are doing stuff that he's not. Like, your friends just make different decisions. Yeah. And so it's like, that's what's so good about this, is that I go like, man, this movie is not just for people like Peter Clavin who go like, oh, I've always struggled making male friends. It's for everyone, because nobody is going to go through life. Very few people are going to go through life with the same 4 friends from kindergarten. Yeah. Like, life change, especially now with the internet and technology. Dude, we move so far from where we start life out that it's like you're going to have to learn how to say goodbye to people, or for just to allow relationships to dramatically change and kind of exit as they need to. Yeah. And here's a fun way to learn about how to handle that when it comes up. You know what I mean?
It's overnight. People have kids and they just get caught up in that, and they come back later sometimes. And then sometimes it's just over time, like, friendships just sort of like run their course, and it's not good or bad, like you were saying. And I think it really shows that in a beautiful way. But one of the things that I never really realized until I was taking notes while watching this movie for this podcast is how also this movie, every single character has a problem with boundaries, and the boundaries between, and basically for the uninitiated, boundaries are different than walls. Walls are what we put up to keep people out. Boundaries are what we put up to stay sane within ourselves. And you put up boundaries with people you love. So if I put up a boundary where I'm like, there are certain topics that are, or, you know, topics of conversation I don't want to discuss with my parents, that's a boundary I put up because it's healthier for us to have this boundary, that kind of thing. And with Zoe, like, Peter needs to open up more. He almost has boundaries. He almost has walls up. He's a little like, he's not in, he's very open and free. And I feel like talks pretty openly about his emotions with his fiance, but he really struggles with, I feel like he's just going with the flow. I don't feel like he really truly is going to kind of poke the bear. We see him kind of build up with resentment over time. And I relate to that because he doesn't want to like rock the boat, which is understandable. And Zoe, we see, has no boundaries. She tells her friends everything that happens, especially sexual details that between her and Peter, and
then gets upset at the same,
and then gets upset which often happens. And she's not even villainized for it, but like, people that get upset when we put up boundaries with them are often people that took advantage of us not having boundaries in the first place. And you kind of see that here, where he starts to tell Sydney, Jason Segel's character, more and more things about their relationship, and she gets super offended by it. And it's a really lovely point of contention where they have a conversation about it, and she hears him. That's what's so shocking. She's like, oh my God, you're right. You're doing the same thing that I was doing with my friends. Yeah. But there was a double standard in place because I guess I'm a woman and it's like allowed that we talk about all the boys stuff, but like, I don't want you talking about me because for whatever my reasons are. And I think that's really beautiful. Like, it's such a lesson in that. And then with Sydney's character, he needs to have a little bit more boundaries because he just kind of bullets through. And here's the thing with friendship, and you and I have learned this with each other, and we've said this to each other multiple times, but like, you can ask me anything you want. Like, there's nothing that's off topic, but I get to decide how I answer it and if I want to answer it. So
100%.
Your friends, your parents, your coworkers, like, they get to like bound into your space and you know, they might overstep or say the wrong thing or whatever, but you get to decide if you answer that at all. And a lot of times,
that's such a good point.
Oh, my boss asked me this, so I have to answer it, right? I'm like, no, you don't. If it's an inappropriate question, you don't have to answer it.
Yeah, and how often do you hear like someone be like, oh man, this person, or it's usually a parent figure, like a family member, like they're just always a man. It's like, well, you know, you're letting them go there. Like, it's almost, this is such a horrible comparison, but I got on a YouTube click hole. I forget the guy's name, the dog whisperer, Caesar something. What's his name? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, I don't know.
Something like that.
That's the Joker. Caesar Romero played the original Joker.
Caesar something, but the dog whisperer, where he, like, his whole thing is, he's like, hey, there's no such thing as a bad pet or a bad dog. There are only bad owners. Every single one of these animals is a result of the boundaries or the lack of boundaries you've set up with your pet. And so, like, yeah, your dog bites people when they come over because they think they own this house and you haven't let them know that they don't. And so it's like, yeah, your mom does that stuff. Hey, your dad says this stuff. Hey, your brother or sister texts you that garbage or whatever. Or they stir up all this drama because you keep inviting it back in your life.
You allow
and
it.
I've had moments in my especially like in my immediate family where I've just gone, hey, just so you know, when you send me those types of text messages that make me feel this way, I don't want to feel that way anymore. So I'm going to stop responding to them. So when you send me that stuff, I'm going to not respond to you. If you keep doing it, I'm going to mute you. Don't make me block you. Like, you're you're my immediate family. I don't want to do that. But it always only takes like one of those really calm moments where I communicate that. Mm-hmm. Sometimes they push back on it the same way like the dog pushes back on. I hate that comparison. I'm not saying my family are dogs, but you know what I mean? Like, where you go, hey, once you establish that boundary a couple times, I go, oh, okay. All right. Well, if I want to keep interacting with this person, I'm not going to do it this way because they won't allow that.
Dogs are a good example, like animals, pets, and then little kids, because they just don't really they're just reacting. Everything they do is reactive.
Yeah.
And it's a very base level, you know, monkey brain kind of like, oh, if I push this button, I get this treat. And it's the same way of like, oh, if I ask my mom for, you know, a G.I. Joe and she says no, but I ask again, and she'll say, and I keep asking, she'll eventually say yes. All you're learning from that is oh, if I push mom hard enough, I'll get what I want. And
Yeah.
that's why it's so important for us to establish our boundaries, share them, communicate them with our people, and be like, hey, like, I love you, this kind of thing. I have issues here. You don't have to over explain. You just explain, I have issues here. So from now on, I'm not going to be coming to poker nights because I have a hard time being around alcohol, and this and this and this. And then once you explain it, communicate it clearly with your friends and let them ask questions if they need to, or family. If they cross that line, you get to decide what level, you get to be in their life and they get to be in yours. That is what empowerment in relationships is. Yeah. And it's so important. The more boundaries that you have up with your people, even your spouses, even your mom and your dad, just because they're in relationship with you does not give them carte blanche to do whatever they want, say whatever they want. It just doesn't.
That's so good.
But we forget that because we're like, well, I owe my mom. She brought me into this world. Guess what, dude? You didn't ask to be in this world. Yep. So you get to make the rules for yourself. And it's not mean. I feel like the biggest lesson that I've learned in the last few years, hands down, is that you can be direct and kind at the same time. And I feel like we've added the brutal to honesty. You can take away the brutal and just be honest. You can be honest in love with your people. And that is one thing that really stuck out this viewing of this movie, is that this is a movie about really three characters, the main two male leads and Rashida Jones's character learning how to have boundaries with each other. Because as much as Zoe's like, go, find your best man, go, she has like benefited from Paul Rudd being the most attentive boyfriend of all time, and it's not healthy in the long run. Like he does need to, and when he meets Sydney, parts of him open up that wouldn't have opened up if he would just have been a girlfriend guy his whole life.
Yeah. No, that's really, really good, man. It's just to name a resource too while you're talking through all this. There's a book called Boundaries by Henry Cloud. I think it might be Cloud and like Charles Townsend. I don't remember if he writes that by himself or not. But like I read that, and that's what blew my mind apart, of this idea that like you cannot change people. You can only decide to what extent you will interact with them. And that's all a boundary is to like stop being so frustrated with people for how they are. That's how they are. If they want to change, they will. If they don't, they won't. But you have to make a decision on what extent you want them in your life, assuming they never change, because you can't change and you don't know if they're going to make that decision or not. So it's like, the whole like, well, like I'm going to fix him or I'm going to fix her, or the whole, you know what I mean? Or the like, well, my mom just needs to stop doing it. It's like, no, look, that's up to her to stop doing that. You get to decide to what extent you're going to interact with that person, and like invite them into your life or not, but it's like, man, and that can be hard to communicate to people, but it's really hard to communicate. Once you learn how to communicate that well, it's really hard to have conflict after that, just to go like, hey, look, this is not, like you said earlier, you said that really well. And I think you're one of the first people who said that to me, that like, look, I don't set up boundaries to keep you out of my life. The boundaries are because I want to keep you in it. Like barriers are what I set up to keep people out of my life. And if the boundaries don't work, that's what's next. Like barriers aren't that healthy. Like it's not a good deal to put up a wall and be like, well, they did this, so I'm cutting them off, as much as you go, hey, you did this, just so you know, when you do those things, here's how I'm going to respond.
Yeah.
So if you don't want me to respond that way, don't do those things.
Actions have consequences. Yeah. And I am constantly in conflict with my own parents, who just, that is such a new concept to them. And a lot of their generation, it just is, because they were taught, they're like, well, you're my kid. I can do whatever I want. I'm like, well, first off, I'm in my 40s. I'm not anybody's kid. And I'm sorry, but parents just have to see their kids or their children as grownups when they grow up. You just have to. I'm sorry. That's just a part of it. I'm sorry. I'm not your 10-year-old little boy anymore, but this is just the way it goes. And a boundary is meant to be movable. A boundary is a gate but not everybody has the combination lock, and you get to decide when you change it. You get to decide who you give it to. And it's so freeing to put up boundaries, because like, to your point, you get to decide, like what you can control and what you can't. And when you start looking at what you can and can't control, you realize that the number of things you can control are innumerable. And guess what? That's not for you anyway. So stop trying to control things you can't. All you can control is how you react to things and how you enter into things. And if a friend just keeps inviting you out after you told them multiple times that you don't want to go to whatever shitty bar they constantly go to, then you get to be like, hey, please don't invite me if you if you can't hear me right now. If you do, I'm just going to ignore you. And eventually I'm just going to mute or block you. And that is not your problem. That is their problem if they can't hear that. It's so tricky. And this is what we talked about a million times, which is what I want this podcast to be, is like, God, it's such a spectrum. It's such a gray area, but there are answers, but you got to figure out what's right for you and what works for you. Only you can figure out your own boundaries.
Most people want to make that work too. You know what I mean? Like this is a really simple example, but I think it's good to have some that aren't too dramatic. Like we had friends over this weekend that have kids, and they had their toddler here with them, and they gave him this can to play around with. So he was like throwing a LaCroix can around my living room, and I was like, hey, let's not do that, because like those have gas and will explode. Like that's not, when you throw those, they explode everywhere. And so I was like, hey, let's not do that. We'll give him something else. I gave him like a Tupperware and a spoon, and he just fake stirred the whole time. But I'm going like, hey, this is one of those things where I go like, I am not going to enjoy our time together while he's throwing that can around, because I'm waiting for it to explode on my white carpet, and I'm going to deal with it later. You guys don't care what he throws around. You're like, I just want the kid to leave me alone and let me eat. So like, by not speaking up, I am unhappy, and I'll probably have a dirty carpet later. By speaking up, I enjoyed my experience with them so much more. That's a silly example because it doesn't sound like a big boundary.
That's
like, it's my boundary that you can't throw sodas. But I go like, hey, it's important to have somewhere you go like, setting boundaries is going to make you enjoy the relationship more. It's going to help you enjoy the relationship more, because you're not going to be zeroed in on that one thing that you wish they would stop doing, that you haven't given them a chance to stop doing, because you won't even tell them that you want them to stop doing it.
Yeah.
Tell them, let them decide. Most people, I know we all have toxic relationships in our lives. Most people, though, are going to go, oh, okay, like I could give a crap what he throws around. I just wanted him to leave me alone to eat. Yeah. Or, I didn't realize that bothered you so much, man. I just didn't want you to feel left out, so we always invite you. I won't. And now it's like, okay, great. I'm not always worried about this thing happening. You're not going like, man, why have Nick or Dave been weird? I feel like something's been off and they won't tell me what's going. Just say it and give them the chance to respond. You know,
it takes 15 seconds sometimes to be like, hey, would you guys mind? You don't even have to over explain yourself, like, or apologize or anything. Just say, hey, if you guys wouldn't mind, could I give them something else to play with? Because the end, you know, and like, I'd rather him not play with this can. And then they're like, oh yeah, sure. And then it's done. And then, like you said, you're freeing yourself up. Like we can free ourselves up by understanding exactly what our problems are with things or our issues are. And then clearly communicating that to the people that we love. It will save you so much time, so much stress, so much resentment, because that is a like, not speaking up for yourself and all the times that you do, like it's a resentment that builds up, and then you start exploding on people that have nothing to do with that situation, and that's unfair.
Who didn't set out to do anything to hurt you. Again, to use that same example, my friends weren't like, hey, watch this, I'm going to give a can to my kid and piss Dave off for the next 30.
Sure.
They were genuinely, it's like, it is hard to eat food when you have a 1-year-old. So it was like, dude, I just need him distracted. I knew that they weren't. I was just like, hey, can I give him something else, because I think it's going to explode? And they're like, oh yeah, he likes a bowl and a spoon. Okay, great, here's a Tupperware. Done.
Fantastic.
Half of the people in our lives, especially family members, when you go like, hey, just so you know, when you do that, it makes me want to put my fist through your face, because I'm thinking, they're going like, oh crap, I had no idea. I've never even thought of that. I'm doing that because XYZ. And you're like, oh yeah, of course, I should have assumed positive intent. You didn't do that thing just to piss me off. And like, game over, you know? But
it's so true. And there's so much beauty and freedom and all these things we're talking about, but it's hard, especially I think for socially conditioned men in this society, because we weren't really taught to communicate or even understand our emotions. So we just leave the room, or we just punch a wall, or, you know, like it gets darker than that. We harm, our spouses or kids or whatever. Like it's just years and years and years of just pin up shit. If we could just like clearly communicate, like, hey, I have a problem with this, and I'm figuring out what it is, but would you mind for the moment?
Even unclearly, stumble through it. Like, do what you have to do, but just start talking.
I heard a therapist say once, when I was like, I don't know the right way to say this, heard them say it wrong. That was huge for me. If somebody loves you, they will understand what you're trying to say. Like, say it wrong and then backpedal. Like, figure out what it is.
Say It Wrong is the title of my favorite emo song from the early aughts.
Oh, it was incredible. Was that early November? But this movie is we could go on and on and on about it.
It's okay.
Was there any aspect of this movie that we haven't discussed yet that you wanted to mention?
I mean, not in a serious way, but I love where we took this. I would just love to say, I think the soundtrack is underrated. The soundtrack, you could wear my underwear, Vindaloo for us to share, presents underneath your tree. What a weird song. What a weird song.
And the chorus is water slide. Water
so
slide. That song.
Dude, those lyrics, just so you know, and I love that it's like a lot of times the song in the movie is just like, oh, it's in the background. It just kind of gives a vibe. Not Water Slide by the Bone Daddies in I Love You Man. That song is they're like, oh, hey, there's a break here. Turn the volume all the way up so everyone can hear the lyrics. You can wear my underwear, Vindaloo for us to share, always presents under your tree. What?
Okay. Here's the thing.
All right, bet.
That song, as the kids say, slaps. That song
it really does.
If I want to have a good day, if it's like today, it was like 70 degrees and sunny, I will put that song on, roll down my windows, and just like drive around having the best time. This whole soundtrack, it has a Spoon song on it that I love, The Underdog.
Good.
It's fantastic.
2 Vampire Weekend songs, the Black Keys, Beck, Cars.
And then the band of all bands in this movie is Rush. A band
the
that
Holy Triumvirate.
I'm not going to lie, I didn't know who Rush was until I saw this movie.
Yeah, I knew who they were. I couldn't have sung you any of their songs. I knew Come Sail Away. That's Styx. There you go, never mind. So yeah, I didn't know any of their songs.
So clearly you didn't know it. Yeah. I feel like we need to have Dave Holmes on just to talk about Rush at us to educate us.
That would be great.
But
he is the 6th subscriber of this podcast, by the way. I'm just building my fantasy subscribers.
Not only did I not know who Rush was, I thought Rush was made up for this movie when I first saw it, which is embarrassing, but it's an honest moment. But I love the moment, which is so beautiful for multiple reasons. One of my favorite scenes in a movie filled with favorite scenes is when Peter Clavin shows Zoe Rush, because she's never heard it. And he's like, are you excited? Are you ready to rock? Ready. And then he plays it on his like MacBook speakers.
Yeah. Where it's like a ThinkPad. Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. But he also says, like, you don't know Rush? You don't know Today's Tom Sayegh? Like it kills me because that is how he sings it.
Yeah, 100%.
And then Rush and then at the end, I don't even know what the story is with this. I looked it up online. There's no story. The band at the very end, who's playing at the wedding, who's playing Rush at the end, is OK Go.
I did not know that. That's
why
so
is
great.
OK Go in this movie? Are they friends with the director?
Why aren't they in every other movie? Is the better question.
It's very true. I love OK Go. But it's just so incredibly random.
You know, if there's one other random thing to highlight from this, if anybody is listening to this episode, this is going to be probably episode 4 or 5, something like that. I don't know.
Sure.
If you've listened to all the other episodes, then you should know why I appreciate this so much. But Peter Clavin is horrible at impressions and does them all the time. I was like, man, this guy gets me. Yeah. Me for like beautiful. My Judd Apatow is just me with the flu. You know what I mean?
I know.
Yeah, it's funny.
I know.
It's getting worse and worse.
It is getting worse. I love that every time Peter Clavin tries to do an impression, it sounds like a leprechaun, and it really does. It's fan, and they lay it in like it's at that first dinner scene with Tom Lennon where he's just like, well, it's not special. Like they're like, it's not quite there. That's the thing that is, I think, one of the hardest things to do that Paul Rudd does so well. Kyle Mooney from SNL does it really well. Is acting awkward on purpose.
Yes.
It's incredibly, it doesn't feel like he's acting awkward on purpose. And also knowing that him and Jason Segel are like, have spent so much time together, and him just being like, all right, Jobin, like just the weird handshakes and stuff. Like,
that sounds about as appetizing as a big plate of dirt
or something. I don't know.
I don't know. I will say, I think I'm still waiting for, sorry to cut you off, but here I go. Paul Rudd's end of the tour. Like, I love that Jason Segel has fully withdrawn from being that guy. And I'm not saying that that's like admirable or anything. That's just the path he chose. Paul Rudd became a Marvel superhero, so he kind of did the opposite. I would love to see, and maybe he doesn't have any desire to do this. I would love to see his range with that. Not necessarily like the character actor side of that and like biopic thing, but just like, hey, be not funny for a whole film, because I think he can do it.
Have you seen The Shrink Next Door?
Oh, no, I haven't. Is that the Will Ferrell, him and Will Ferrell? Okay, that's it.
I'll just say watch that.
All right.
I think it might scratch that itch. Well, this is what there's so many things. We literally could do a watch along with this movie where we're like, we like this part and we like this part. The fact that we're like an hour and a half into the actual episode and we haven't even mentioned Lou Ferrigno yet is incredible. I love
put him in a heap of hold.
Speaking of bad impressions, I'll put him in a heap of hold.
That one, speaking of bad, well, this is not a bad impression, but I love Jason Segel's Andre the Giant. Anybody want a peanut?
I know, which was real, by the way. Which is
I know
it's fantastic. And you mentioned this in an earlier episode, but the fact that when you hear anybody want a peanut, you think about this movie instead of Princess Bride.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, that's a quote from this movie.
Jason Segel would really see that as like a point of pride. I feel like
we'll bring him on the next episode. He can tell us all about it.
Yeah.
He's our 7th subscriber. I don't know if you knew that.
Up.
Yeah.
Man, I can't wait
7 subs, my guy.
It's a very specific advertising company that we're gonna find for all these people.
Yeah.
Let me think. I feel like I covered everything that I wrote down. Was there anything else that stuck out to you that you wanted to cover?
Probably. Nothing I can think of off the top of my head, but this is going to be the movie that we reference in every episode of this podcast to one extent or another, just because, and it really does. It surprises me that I don't know, you may know this again more. I think you're better with this kind of data, but I don't know how successful this movie was. I know it wasn't huge. For sure, The Hangover overshadowed it. It was not a year for these types of movies. It was well received, but it just wasn't big. I really believe we'll see it'll have a second life that'll be huge.
Yeah.
But it surprises me that we haven't seen more of this. Like, we haven't seen more, like, no one goes like, oh, we just need I Love You Man was successful, let's make some of those, the way they did with the hard R comedies. This one was still, I'm pretty sure this one was still a hard R, wasn't it? Or it was an R. They say the F word like 100 times in the movie, which is the only reason I assume that it got an R rating.
Not a hard R. This movie actually did pretty good. It was a $40 million budget and it grossed 92. So it wasn't a mega success, but like that compared with what The Hangover did.
Yeah.
I just hate that it got overshadowed by that. And,
you can see it because they just never made another. Sorry, go on.
And honestly, I'm glad they didn't. The thing that ruined The Hangover for me is that they made 2 more and just kind of like milked it. And it just seemed like, what are we doing here? Which is one of the reasons why, I mean, I think the most modern example of this is Bridesmaids. Bridesmaids is a lightning in a bottle that they everybody in that movie easily could have cashed 2 more movies worth of checks and nobody would have blamed them. But the fact that they were like, nope, one and done is fantastic. And I think what make that movie a classic. And I really do think sometimes sequels tend to kind of muddy the water a little bit.
Well, and I don't even mean sequel necessarily, but like the same way that we got Old School in 2003 and then we got The Hangover in 2009.
Yeah.
It's like, I go like, hey, where was the movie where we go like, oh, we got I Love You Man in 2009. And then and it's like, no, we kind of stopped. We didn't make any more of those movies. Judd kind of has it has that Judd feel, but it's like Judd's movies are a lot less, maybe a lot of it comes down to the directing, because like we were talking about this, I think maybe before we recorded, if not, you can cut this out, but what was the director's name for this?
Jon
Samberg. But like there's a feel to his movies that feels like a happy movie from the early aughts. Like Along Came Polly, I Love You Man. Those movies have a feel. We don't get a lot of those movies anymore. I remember She's Out of My League was one that I loved. Another movie that I thought did pretty good, showing like some real archetypes and stuff.
Same year,
like
2009.
Oh, was it really? I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
But you go like, man, this movie just feels good. We haven't gotten a lot more of that. Not sequels, but just like the kind of like the spiritual siblings of that movie, the way that like Old School and Hangover were, you know?
I think we got that, but it was more in the realm of television, because right after this or
That's
right around
fair.
this time is like The New Girl, which shows that it has that kind of feel with the male friendships in that.
Those guys were the stars of that movie or that show 100% after like 2 episodes.
Yeah, they're the best part for sure. And then there was a show on, I believe, ABC for a while. Shoot, what was it called? Hold, please. You're gonna know.
Are you thinking Happy Endings? Or-
Holy shit! How did you do that?
I literally just was like
Yes.
ABC. ABC has not had a lot lot of great sitcoms that
You're right.
fit that vote.
Happy Endings, too. That was
It got canceled really
incredible.
early.
Yeah, but that was a movie that had three dudes in it that were friends, and they didn't fight every episode. They were like genuinely like supportive and got along. And Adam Pally is one of he's a comedy sniper. Like, I don't understand how that dude is so funny.
Freak of nature, yeah.
But so there were moments like that, that happened more on television, which I Love You Man, I think would have made a great TV show. But I'm really glad that they kept it in the film realm. That's what I was talking about at the beginning. Like, comedy movies in the theater just don't do as well, and there aren't as many of them greenlit. Fair. So, why don't we have more Judd Apatows? Judd Apatow's kind of the only one making big blockbuster comedies in the theater, and it isn't really doing it even anymore. Like, his last movie went straight to streaming because of COVID.
His next one's going straight. It's going to be on Netflix. The Bubble. Have you seen the preview for The Bubble?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
It's very, very different for him. I'm curious about it. But
meta.
the other thing I could see is that I Love You Man is only rated R because of the F-bombs. I can't think of another reason. The themes aren't crazy, sophisticated. No. There's zero violence or nudity. So you go this was rated R because you dropped 30 F-bombs. If you hadn't, it could have been 2 seasons of a great TV show, So I could see that a little bit. That makes sense.
Yeah, probably so. Well, you mentioned the end of the tour. I want to talk about just briefly a couple of my favorite Jason Segel moments were I love his revamp of the Muppets. I thought he's fantastic in that. And my favorite thing about that is that he knew kind of how to step aside. Like, he's not the star of that, but he is in the first couple acts and then kind of takes a back seat. I love, there's a movie that doesn't get talked about enough. It's a Duplass Brothers movie called Jeff Who Lives at Home. Have you seen this? It's him and Ed Helms. It's a really beautiful little special movie.
It's a Duplass Brothers movie, through and through. It's so good.
Yeah, truly. And then, honestly, end of the tour, I think his take on David Foster Wallace and him and Jesse Eisenberg together, it was just, there was something magical that happened in that movie. Not enough people saw it, in my opinion. Do you have post I Love You Man, Jason Segel love?
I mean, nothing to add to your list. I think that's literally, I was thinking Jeff Who Lives at Home was the one that I wanted to make sure people hear, because I don't think enough people have seen that. For sure, the end of the tour. But Jason Segel's just great, man. I mean, honestly, I love him on How I Met Your Mother. I go back to, I cannot say enough how much we enjoyed that show. That show did the writing on that show. They did such a good job of the running joke and the callback in a way that made you feel like with friends, the way I can just say stuff to you and we will laugh and no one else in the room knows what we're talking about. Yeah. That show brought everyone in on that. And a lot of great shows did. They weren't the first to do it or anything, but I just think it's really special. He's been a part of a couple of those things. Freaks and Geeks was one of those. It just got canceled. But where you look back and you go oh, okay, How I Met Your Father probably won't be as big as How I Met Your Mother, not because it's not good, not because Hilary Duff's not great, not because of anything, but because you had Neil Patrick Harris and Jason Segel, a no-name Jason Segel, cast in that. On top of the rest of that cast was phenomenal. The rest of that, there weren't bad players in How I Met Your Mother, in my opinion. But you just go that's special. We got to see him come in 2005 as some guy that nobody knew. It was kind of wait, is that the guy from Freaks and Geeks, but a little bit thicker now?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And even in SLC Punk, he just was always kind of the tall, lanky white kid growing up who showed up. Yeah. But no, I mean, you've named them all, and I don't think, and for me personally, Paul Rudd, apex Paul Rudd for me is I Love You Man and Clueless. Those are the two. There wasn't anything post I Love You Man where I was oh, but he was so much better. He's great in all those things. I don't dislike any of their performances in any of their movies. Those are two guys that I love. But I Love You Man was peak them for both of them. And Clueless is it's hard for me not to put that in my top 10 all time. I have such a deep affection for that movie, Yeah,
if for people out there who want to see, I'd like to highlight a couple of my favorite Paul Rudd roles that the movies just didn't get as much play, or maybe you forgot about it because there's just so much out there. But one of those is in 2012, there's a movie called Wanderlust. That's a stacked comedy cast about, it's him and Jennifer Aniston and Justin Theroux and Jordan Peele, and it's just everybody that's funny is in that movie. It's a David Wayne movie. He's the same guy that wrote and directed Role Models and Wet Hot American Summer. Really, really funny. I think gets slept on. This is 40, one of our mutual favorites.
Excellent.
Which we will do a podcast on at some point.
Soon, hopefully. Actually, that's a great one.
Yeah, pretty soon. And then he did a movie. I talked about All Is Bright. Shoot, I lost it. He did a movie. I think it's also David Wayne. Let me look at this really quick. Let me pull it up online. That is it's about 10 years too late for a spoof type movie. Yeah, it was directed by David Wayne, the same guy who did all those movies I just mentioned. It's called They Came Together, and it came out in 2014, and it's him and Amy Poehler and Bill Hader and just a million funny people. Kobe Smolder, speaking of How I Met Your Mother.
Yeah.
Ellie Kemper, Jason Mantzoukas, Ed Helms, Michael Ian Black, Randall Park, Jack McBrayer, Kenan Thompson, Ken Marino. It's just Adam Scott. Like John Stamos is in it.
Insane.
It is a romantic comedy making fun of early aughts romantic comedies. And it's so pitch perfect, while also being one. So it's kind of in the scary movie style without going that far. There's no Wayans in this one, unfortunately. Although I don't know, maybe it was Amy Poehler, maybe it was Damon Wayans being a white chick. We don't know.
Yeah, he makes a really believable white chick.
But honestly, whenever people are like, "Hey, I need a good rom-com tonight on Facebook or Twitter or whatever," I'm like, if you want a rom-com, like They Came Together is fucking delightful. And it got slept on. For whatever reason, it didn't get the distribution, which honestly brings me back to I Love You Man, dude. I think we've talked about it briefly, but I think the number one thing that didn't make I Love You Man as big as something like The Hangover, other than the fact that it's just a more subtle, sweeter movie, is it was absolutely mismarketed. If you look at the movie posters, the tagline is "He needed a best man. He got the worst."
Yeah, you're right. That's insane. That's
has
you, me, and Dupree.
Nothing to do with that movie, because
100%.
Like Sydney is not bad. That's the whole thing. We just discussed it for 2 hours, but it drives me nuts when you look at it. It's this whole like, oh, this guy's gonna come into his life and he's gonna mess it up, and they're gonna have to get him out of there so they can be a happy couple again. It's just so like ridiculous to me how sometimes movies just, they're like, oh, well, this worked with this other movie, let's market this movie the same way. It's like, look at what you have. Because to me, I Love You Man is a true gem in the last 15 years. And it just breaks my heart that it didn't get the due that I think it deserves. But like to your point, like, I hope it finds its way on DVD and streaming, and is just one of those that, you know, like we were talking about in an earlier episode, sometimes having a friend say, dude, you have to see this. You know, that's what this last year, Barb and Star Go to Vista Del Mar was for me.
Yes.
I will gladly mention that movie over and over and over again to friends who are like, I need a good comedy.
I watched it because of you. Love that movie.
And I feel like it's more meaningful that way sometimes than like The Machine telling you to watch something. But it breaks my heart because, you know, I want this movie to do like 50 million more than it did. But anyway, I love the things I love, Dave. I'm not going to apologize for it.
I'm here for it. Don't do it. Don't apologize. Stop.
Well, anything to add as we close up shop here today?
I don't think so. Go follow us on everything and tell us what you think, if we're right, if we're wrong. At Betterman Film Club on Instagram, Betterman Pod on Twitter, because Twitter does not allow enough characters in their usernames. Jack Dorsey, actually, our 8th subscriber. Hear me out, my guy.
We are racking up subscribers in
we've only
time.
got 8, but they're bigwigs for sure.
Yeah, they are. They have a lot of reach. They're not going to tweet about it, but they have a lot of reach if they wanted to.
No, that's really it for me. I mean, I really would love to be able to connect with people, especially. I mean, you're in Nashville right now. I'm in Dallas. Like, hopefully people are listening to this all over, and I'd love for people to be able to feel like they can chime in, not only in the actual film club for guys that we do, but also like just on social, kind of like, what do you want to hear us talk about? What movies? What did you agree with? What did you disagree with? I talked to a friend today who said that they were listening along, and at one point they were like, but that's not the point of that movie. Like, you're missing the point. Like, they were like, I was just having a conversation with you. Like, I was in the room, and I'm like, well, get on social and do it. Like,
tell us.
That's where,
And once
So
we
no, I
start,
love that.
now that it's out there, like I want to encourage people more and more, like write in bettermanfilmclub@gmail.com, like at socials, in whatever way you feel most comfortable in writing and telling us like things, even if it's from like months previous, and we will read it on the show. And like, here's the thing, like I think we could have a recurring segment where we fact check ourselves, because listening back, I'm like, oh, that wasn't the right year that came out, or that wasn't what that
100%.
movie was about, or whatever. And I'm all about being fact checked. I'm all about, let's get as pedantic as you want, like we will make fun of you, but be as pedantic as you want. But no, we love hearing from people. Whatever, we just stoked that people are listening to this in the first place. So we want this to be a conversation. That's honestly like the whole film club idea, the actual film club that the podcast is an offshoot of, is to have those conversations, and not just like the ones that touch on the thematic stuff or like the actual movie making, but like the talk that we had today about boundaries and relationships and parents and stuff like that. Like I love the catalyst of movies and where the conversation goes. That's 100%. My favorite thing.
Absolutely.
All right, Dave, are you going to take us out with a movie quote?
I am. Hey, let me throw this out there real quick. Follow Nick Flora on social media. He's at Nick Flora on all the platforms. Yeah,
that's right. Thank you.
I'm at Dave Wears Black on all the platforms. All the ones that matter, at least. If you can't find me on that under that name, then
what are you on
stop
Zanga?
/ at Dave Wears Black. Yeah.
Oh,
MySpace.com / Dave Wears Black. I'm just kidding.
What's your live journal? What's your oh shoot, what was the one that came after MySpace that didn't stand a chance? Anyway, I lost it.
I don't remember anything between MySpace and Facebook.
There was one that tried to be a thing. I lost it. Anyway, continue.
That's all I got.
Nice.
Oh, I'm supposed to take us out. Take us out with a quote, yeah?
Yeah, so we're going to end the episode with a movie quote. The last one we did, by the way, was, you guys, the bathroom in here is nuts, which is from 2007's Hot Rod, a Stone Cold comedy classic in my house.
In every house.
Spoken by Bill Hader.
Whether you like it or not, that is a comedy classic in your house too, listener.
It is. Yeah, right? You don't have a choice. Boundaries be damned. That movie is a classic in your house. All right, set us up, Dave. What do you got?
Oh, I'm not here with these fellas. I got a pig in competition down at the livestock pavilion, and I am going to win that blue ribbon.
You did it. You did it. Oh my God, dude.